The bell above the diner door had been ringing since 5 in the morning. It rang when Walt backed his truck into the gravel lot and stomped mud off his boots before coming inside. It rang when the Hendersons showed up, both of them over 70, both of them ordering the same thing they had ordered every Monday for the past 11 years. It rang when the crew from the road construction site piled in, loud and sawdust-smelling, filling the back booths like they owned them, which in a way they did between October and March. Dot's all-day grill did not look like much from the outside. A low building with a hand-painted sign, a parking lot that needed repaving, and a window display that still had a Thanksgiving turkey cutout taped to the glass because nobody had gotten around to taking it down. Inside, it smelled like butter and coffee and something faintly sweet from the syrup that always seemed to find its way onto every surface by mid-morning. The counter had 8 stools. The floor had a crack running from the door to the first booth that had been meaning to fix for 6 years. It was, in every visible way, completely ordinary. Nobody inside it knew that a ship had been sitting above the cloud layer since 3 in the morning, running scans. The Vreth had been studying Earth for 4 months. Their ships were fast, and their instruments were precise, and their empire had swallowed 11 worlds without significant resistance. The method was always the same. First, they mapped the population. Then they identified areas of gathering. Then they sent in a ground unit to activate the fear emitter and watch the local life forms collapse into panic. The data from that panic told the Vreth everything they needed to know about how long a conquest would take. 11 worlds. 11 panics. Clean, efficient, and always very fast. Commander Vrul stood at the observation deck of the scout vessel and looked down at the rotating image of the diner. It was, by Vreth standards, an absurdly small target. 41 life forms in and around the structure. No weapons detected. No armor. No shielding of any kind. She had picked it specifically because it was so small. A test run. A warm-up. Conditions, she said. Bryn, her sensor specialist, pulled up the display. He was thin even by Vreth standards, with 4 pale eyes that moved independently when he was reading data. Life form count stable at 41. No heightened stress indicators. Several are in a state of what appears to be mild physical fatigue. Overall neurological baseline is, he paused. Relaxed. Good, Vrul said. Send Det. Soldier Det was not a subtle instrument. He stood just over 7 feet tall. His armor was black segmented plating that covered him from the top of his broad head to the base of his thick legs. His 4 eyes were built behind a reinforced visor that glowed faint violet in low light. He carried the fear emitter on his back, a device the size of a fuel canister that produced a frequency capable of triggering the deep panic response in most known species within 40 seconds. He had used it on 9 worlds. He had watched entire market squares empty in under a minute. He had watched trained soldiers drop their weapons and run. He materialized in the gravel parking lot of Dot's all-day grill at 6:47 in the morning. He stood still for a moment, the way he always did, letting the locals see him, giving the fear time to start. 2 cars pulled into the lot. A man got out of the first one, glanced at Det, and walked toward the diner entrance without breaking his stride. Det waited. The man held the door open. You going in? Det said nothing. The man shrugged and went inside. Det followed. The bell above the door rang. The inside of the diner hit him like a wall. Heat, noise, the smell of oil on a flat grill, the sound of plates being set down and chairs being pulled, and 3 different conversations happening at once. Det stood in the entrance and processed it. His suit was running atmospheric analysis. His emitter was primed. He needed only to activate it. A young man with a notepad appeared from behind the counter. He had dark hair and the expression of someone who found everything moderately interesting. He looked at Det the way someone looks at an unusual piece of furniture with mild curiosity and no particular alarm. Hey there. Grab any seat you like. Menus are on the tables. We've got a Belgian waffle special today, comes with 2 eggs your way and your choice of meat. He was already moving again, coffee pot in hand. Someone will be right with you. He was gone before Det could respond. Not that Det had planned to respond. Det stood in the entrance of Dot's all-day grill in full black alien battle armor, 7 feet tall, glowing violet behind the visor. Nobody looked at him for more than 2 seconds. Walt was reading a newspaper. The Hendersons were splitting a piece of toast. The construction crew in the back was arguing about something involving a drainage pipe on Route 9. From the kitchen, A woman's voice cut through everything else. Ray, I need that table 6 order, and tell whoever's standing in the door to either come in or go out because you're letting the cold air in. The young man Ray reappeared and smiled at Det. Sorry about that. She's not wrong, though. Door. Det stepped inside. The bell rang again as the door swung shut behind him. He activated the fear emitter. Nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. The emitter had a sound to it when it was running. A low, steady hum that Det had always found vaguely satisfying. It sat just below the range of most species' conscious hearing, which was the point. You did not hear it so much as feel it settling into your bones, finding the oldest and deepest part of your brain, the part that remembered being small and hunted in the dark, and pressing down on it hard. On the third world they had visited, a planet of large 6-limbed beings who had actual military infrastructure, the emitter had cleared a fortified garrison in under 3 minutes. Soldiers had gone through windows. 2 of them had run directly into walls. The emitter had been running for 90 seconds inside Dot's all-day grill, and the only thing that had changed was that Walt had turned a page of his newspaper. The overhead lights flickered. A glass of water on the nearest table vibrated gently against its coaster. The salt shaker near the window crept toward the edge of the table and tipped over the side. A man from the construction crew in the back booth caught it without looking up from his conversation. He set it back on the table. He kept talking about the drainage pipe. Det stood there. He had no protocol for this. There was no field manual entry for emitter active, life forms undisturbed. He ran a self-diagnostic. The emitter was working correctly. Output was confirmed. Frequency was set to the standard cross-species fear band. Everything was functioning exactly as designed. The problem was not the emitter. Up on the ship, Bryn was pressing both sets of hands flat on his console and trying to stay calm. Commander, he said, the readings are not changing. Vrul turned from the viewport. What do you mean they are not changing? I mean the human neurological baseline is exactly what it was before Det activated the emitter. Mild fatigue, moderate hunger satisfaction in some cases. One of them appears to be in a state of low-level irritation about something, but it predates our arrival by approximately 2 hours. He pulled up the data column and gestured at it. There is nothing here. No spike. No suppression. No shielding. The signal is reaching them. They are just not responding to it. Vrul stared at the readout for a long moment. Increase output to maximum. Bryn sent the order down. In the diner, Det pushed the emitter to its highest setting. The hum became something almost audible, a pressure in the room that was not quite sound. The lights flickered again, longer this time. The coffee pot on the burner behind the counter rattled. A framed photograph of a fishing trip on the wall shifted slightly to the left. The woman from the kitchen, Dot, the others called her, leaned through the serving window and looked at the photo. She straightened it with one hand without stepping out of the kitchen. Ray was moving between tables with a coffee pot. He paused near the window, tilted his head, listened to the hum for exactly 2 seconds. Walt, he said, you hear that? Walt lowered his newspaper. Listened. Electrical, maybe. In the walls. Yeah, Ray said. He topped off Walt's coffee. I'll tell Dot. She'll call someone. He moved on. That was the entire response. Det turned the emitter off. Not because he had been told to. Because he was, in a way he did not have clear words for, not sure what else to do. He stood very still near the entrance and looked at the room. He was 7 feet tall and covered in armor that had made a 4-armed general weep openly in front of his troops. And he had been standing here for 4 minutes, and a woman in her 60s had reached through a window to straighten a picture frame and then gone back to her grill. Ray appeared at his elbow. He was holding a menu. I don't want to rush you, Ray said pleasantly, but we've got a few tables opening up in about 10 minutes when the early crowd heads out. So if you want one of the good ones by the window, now's the time. He held out the menu. The hash browns are really good today. Dot does this thing where she presses them flat and lets them sit longer. They come out like you know when something's perfect. Like that. Det looked at the menu. It had pictures. He took it. Ray smiled and moved on to someone else. On the ship, Vrul had been silent for almost a full minute, which Bryn had learned was never a good sign. The emitter is designed to trigger a biological fear response, she said finally. It has worked on every species we have encountered. Yes, Bryn said carefully. So either humans are biologically unique in a way our 4 months of study failed to detect, she said, or Or the context is interfering, Bryn said. He had been thinking about this since the salt shaker incident. Commander, these beings came here specifically to eat and to be around other beings they know. They are in a familiar place doing a familiar thing. The emitter produces an abstract threat signal. But these humans, he searched for the right word. They may have a hierarchy of attention, and right now their attention is on breakfast. Vril looked at the diner on her screen, at the small figures moving between tables, at the one enormous armored figure standing near the door holding a laminated menu with pictures on it. Go down, she said. I'll go down myself. Bryn did not say what he was thinking, which was that he was not sure that was going to help. He started preparing for the beam down. There was a field behind the diner where nothing much grew except dry grass and one stubborn oak tree that leaned slightly east as if it had been trying to leave for years. It was there that Vril and Bryn materialized, 2 minutes after the beam down order was given. Vril was in full command regalia. Her armor was a deep gray-green, ceremonial in its detailing but still combat-rated, fitted with rank markings along the shoulder ridges that meant something significant on 11 different worlds. She was not as large as Det, but she carried herself in a way that took up more space than her body actually occupied. Every movement she made was deliberate. She had walked into the throne rooms of defeated leaders. She had stood on the bridges of burning warships. She had never once adjusted her posture for another species. Bryn was in standard field gear, his 4 data tablets tucked under one arm, his scanners already running. They walked across the dry grass toward the back of the diner. A cat was sitting on top of a trash can near the back door. It watched them approach with the particular expression that cats use for everything, which is no expression at all. Bryn's scanner noted it as a small domesticated predator and moved on. They went around to the front. Vril pushed open the door. The bell rang. The inside of the diner greeted them the way it greeted everyone, with warmth and noise and the smell of something on a grill. Det was standing near the far wall, still holding his menu. Ray was delivering plates to the construction crew. Greta, the other waitress, a solid woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and the movements of someone who had spent years doing physical work, was pouring coffee at the counter without looking at what she was pouring. She glanced at Vril and Bryn the way she had glanced at Det, the way she probably glanced at everything, with the particular calm of someone who has seen enough unusual things that unusual no longer triggers anything except a mild mental note. She gestured at the open tables. Vril did not sit down. She stood in the center of the diner and drew herself up and spoke in clear translated English, because the translator had had 4 months and it was very good at its job. People of this location, she said. Her voice was built for command. It carried across the room without effort. The Vreth Empire has entered your atmosphere for the purpose of evaluating this world for integration into our domain. Your planet's capacity for resistance has been assessed. You are advised not to attempt it. There was a pause. It was not the pause of fear. It was the pause of people who were in the middle of something and had to process an interruption. Walt put his newspaper down. He looked at Vril the way he had looked at the electrical hum earlier, with mild interest and a complete absence of alarm. Integration, Walt said. Like, you want to take over? That is correct, Vril said. Walt nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are thinking about whether they have time for another cup of coffee. Harold, who was 74 years old and sitting with 3 other retired men at the round table near the window. Harold looked at his friend across the table and said, Is this one of those things kids do now? With the cameras? His friend looked around for cameras. Maybe. Ray had appeared from the kitchen side. He was looking at Vril and Bryn with genuine interest. Not alarm. Interest. The kind a person has when something new walks in and they are trying to figure out how to be helpful. Hi, he said. Welcome. I've got a corner table that fits 4 comfortably. There's 3 of you, which is actually better because the corner seat is a little cramped. Good light there, though. He was already moving. You want to follow me? Vril turned to look at him. Ray waited pleasantly. Bryn's scanner was running on quiet mode, but he was reading the output in the corner of his eye, and none of the numbers were doing what they should have been doing. He leaned slightly toward Vril. The human named Ray has been in continuous social engagement since we entered. His stress indicators have not moved. Commander, I think he is just doing his job. Vril turned back to the room. She was trying to find something to work with. Some flicker of unease, some tightened posture, some instinctive drawing together that prey species always showed when a predator entered the space. It was not there. The construction crew had briefly looked up and then gone back to their food. The older men were still debating the camera question. Walt had picked up his newspaper again. Though he was not reading it, he was watching Vrul with the alert, unhurried attention of someone watching weather come in from the west. Not afraid, just watching. The kitchen door swung open and Dot came out. She was 61 years old. She was holding a spatula. She had flour on her left forearm and a look on her face that was not hostile, but also was not soft. It was the look of a woman who had run this diner for 22 years and had at some point decided that she did not have time for things that were not immediately relevant to the diner running correctly. She looked at Vrul. She looked at Bryn. She looked at Det, still standing by the wall with the menu. She looked at Ray. "Why is nobody at table 6? She said. "Sorry. Table 6 has been waiting 8 minutes. She looked back at Vrul. Her voice did not change in warmth or temperature. "You need to move to a table or to the side. You're standing in the main aisle, and I've got food coming through in about 40 seconds. She went back into the kitchen. Vrul stood exactly where she was for 3 full seconds. Then, without entirely understanding why, she moved to the side. Bryn did not fully understand how they ended up in the corner booth. It had happened in increments. Ray had gestured toward the table a second time. Vrul had said nothing, which in Vreth body language meant neither yes nor no, but which Ray had apparently interpreted as a yes, because he was already laying out menus. Bryn had followed Vrul because following Vrul was what he did. Det had followed Bryn because standing alone near the door with a menu had apparently reached its natural conclusion. And now all 3 of them were in a corner booth of a human diner with laminated menus in front of them and Ray standing with his notepad, ready. Vrul looked at the menu. She was doing it the way she did everything, scanning for tactical information. Finding none. "The items listed," she said carefully. "These are all forms of food." "Yes, ma'am," Ray said. "Breakfast menu runs until 11. After that we switch to lunch, but honestly some people just order breakfast at lunch too, and Dot doesn't really mind. You have any allergies I should know about? Or stuff you can't eat?" Bryn checked the atmospheric composition data from his scanner and compared it against the food items on the menu. Broadly, they could metabolize most of it. Their biology was not so different from carbon-based Earth life. "We can consume most organic matter," he said. Ray nodded like this was a normal thing to hear. "Okay. I usually tell people who aren't sure to try the scrambled eggs and the home fries, because almost everybody likes those. But the waffles are really where it's at today. Dot's been doing the batter from scratch since 5. He tapped the menu. "I'll give you a few minutes." He left. Vrul set down her menu and looked at Bryn. Bryn knew that look. It meant, "Explain this." "I don't have an explanation yet," Bryn said. He pulled out a data tablet. "But I am working on something." He had stopped trying to analyze the fear response data 20 minutes ago because there was simply nothing there to analyze. What he had started analyzing instead was everything else. And everything else was, from a scientific standpoint, extraordinary. He began writing. The first thing he noted was the greeting ritual. Every human who entered the diner was greeted by Ray or Greta. The greeting was almost always the same short exchange. The human would be asked how they were. They would say fine. The server would say good and move on. No real information was exchanged. The same ritual happened at departure. Bryn had watched it repeat 14 times in the last 20 minutes. The humans did not seem to find it meaningless. If anything, the ones who were not greeted immediately because Ray was busy showed a faint, brief expression of mild disconnection until someone acknowledged them. They were using the ritual to confirm that they existed to each other, that they were known. He wrote that down. The second thing was Dot. Bryn had been watching Dot through the kitchen window for the past several minutes. She moved through the kitchen the way Vrul moved through the ship, with complete ownership of the space, with the expectation that everything around her would function correctly, and with a focused intensity that left no room for distraction. She was clearly in charge. Nobody had to be told this. No rank markings. No armor. A cloth tied around her waist and a spatula in her hand, in a manner that had apparently been enough for 22 years. Bryn had studied leadership structures on 9 planets. He had never seen authority conveyed so efficiently through pure posture and pace. He wrote that down too. The third thing, the thing that Bryn was still trying to put into proper scientific language, was the general atmosphere of the room. Across his career, Bryn had been in many spaces where large groups of beings gathered. Command centers, market squares, holding facilities. Even in the pleasant ones, there was always a background level of tension, competition, or caution, or the low-level social arithmetic of beings calculating where they stood relative to each other. Dot's all-day grill did not have that. What it had instead was something that Bryn did not have a precise breath word for. He tried a few translations in his head and settled on the closest one, ease. The humans in this room were at ease in a way that was almost structural, as if the building itself produced it, as if coming here was a known quantity in their lives, a fixed point, and fixed points were restful. Ray returned with 3 plates. Okay, so I went ahead and did a little of everything for you, because I figured it'd be easier than explaining. This is the scrambled eggs really light. Dot does them with a little cream. These are the home fries. She does them with onion and bell pepper. And these are the hash browns I mentioned. And this is just toast. Butter's on the table. He set the plates down and pulled the butter dish from the next table without hesitating. Det looked at the plate in front of him. There were 4 strips of bacon on it. He picked one up. He looked at it for a moment. He ate it. He was still for 2 seconds. He ate the second one. Vril watched Det eat bacon with an expression Bryn had never seen on her face before. He did not have a word for that one either. Bryn wrote down 3 more notes, then stopped and just looked at the room, at the steam rising from the plates, at the sound of forks on ceramic, at Harold telling a story at the round table that made all 4 retired men laugh at the same time. In 11 worlds of conquest, Bryn had never once stopped to look at anything. He was not sure what that meant, but he thought it probably meant something. Harold did not ask permission. That was simply not how Harold operated. He had grown up on a farm, spent 4 years in the military, come home, farmed for another 30 years, retired, and now he spent his mornings at Dot's because the coffee was good and he liked having somewhere to be. He was 74 years old, and he had reached the particular age where social hesitation had mostly worn away, replaced by a straightforward interest in things that were new. 3 large aliens in a corner booth were new. He picked up his coffee mug and walked over. Mind if I sit? He was already pulling out the chair. Harold, he said, by way of introduction. He looked at the 3 of them in turn. You're the ones who came in making the announcement earlier. Vril looked at him. We are conducting an evaluation of your planet. For conquest, Harold said. He did not say it with alarm. He said it the way he would repeat back instructions he wanted to make sure he had right. Yeah, I got that part. How's it going? Vril said nothing. Harold took this as a neutral answer. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and settled in. Bryn had his data tablet open on the table and was already writing. So where are you from? Harold asked. Bryn began to explain the Vreth system, its location, its size, its configuration. Harold listened. He asked 2 clarifying questions. He nodded in a way that communicated he had mostly followed it. Long way, Harold said. Yes, Bryn said. We do that too, Harold said. Go long ways for things. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. He drank his coffee. You said conquest. You've done this before? To other places? 11 worlds, Vril said. She said it the way she always said it, with the weight of fact. Harold nodded. He looked at his mug for a moment. How'd those go? Efficiently, Vril said. And this one? Harold said. So far. There was a pause. Det reached across the table and took a piece of toast from the shared plate Ray had left. He ate it without any sign of awareness that he was doing something unexpected. Less efficiently, Bryn said. Harold laughed. Not a mocking laugh. A genuine one, short and warm, the kind that comes from something landing exactly right. Well, he said, we've had some practice at that. Resisting things. He paused. Not on purpose, most of the time. We're not really, it's not like we sat down and planned to be hard to scare. Things just kept happening, and we kept getting up. What kinds of things? Bryn said. His stylus was moving. Harold thought about it. Wars, he said first, because that was the obvious one. A lot of wars. We're pretty good at wars. Also terrible at them. We've made a real mess of things, more than once. He said this without defensiveness, as a plain accounting of fact. But the thing about a war is it ends. That's the thing people forget when they're in the middle of one. It feels permanent, but it ends. We've fought each other seriously, real destruction, the kind that takes generations to come back from, and then turned around and started trading with each other, building things together. The same countries, same people, basically. Vril was listening. She had not intended to listen, but Harold was not performing. He was just talking, the way someone talks when they are not trying to convince you of anything, which, paradoxically, was very convincing. There was a sickness, Harold continued, not long ago, spread all over the world. Every country, killed a lot of people. He said this quietly, not with drama. We lost some folks we knew. He looked at his coffee. We got through it, he said. Not gracefully. We complained a lot. People argued about it, Lord, did people argue about it. But we got through. Same way we get through most things. You just keep going. You get up. You come have your coffee. You try to be decent to the people around you. You keep going. Bryn had stopped writing. He was just listening. The thing you should probably know about us, Harold said, is that most of us aren't thinking about big things most of the time. Conquest, empires, end of the world, that's not really what's on our minds. What's on my mind right now, genuinely, is whether my knee is going to give me trouble when I have to get the north field ready before Thursday, because there's rain coming and the ground's been dry and it needs doing. He looked at Vril. That's real to me. What you're describing is big and far away. Big and far away is harder to be scared of than a field that needs planting. Vril looked at this small, old human with his bad knee and his coffee mug and his 19 years of Monday mornings in this chair. Are you not afraid of us at all? She said. It came out differently than she intended. Less like a tactical assessment. More like a real question. Harold considered it seriously. He gave it actual thought, which Vril noticed. I don't know enough about you to be afraid yet, he said. You seem like you've got your own situation going on. Everybody does. He picked up his mug. You want more coffee? Ray appeared from across the diner. Yeah, Harold. Can we get a refill over here? On it. Harold looked back at Vril with the simple ease of a man who had just done a friendly thing and expected nothing complicated from it. Vril looked at Bryn. Bryn looked at his tablet, then at Harold, then at his tablet again. He wrote, in small careful letters, they are not broken. They are built differently. And then beneath that, after a moment, we came to the wrong planet. Greta brought the check. She set it on the edge of the table without ceremony, the way she set every check on every table, and moved on without waiting for a reaction. The check was for 3 coffees and 2 full breakfast plates and 1 order of side bacon. Ray had not charged for the toast because he had brought it without being asked and had a policy about that. Vril looked at the small piece of paper for a long time. On 9 of the 11 worlds they had conquered, the locals had tried, in their final moments before surrender, to offer something. Resources, coordinates, loyalty pledges. The offerings were always large and always desperate. Nobody had ever handed Vril a bill for $11.40. She put down the exact amount in the closest human currency equivalent they had collected during the survey period. Bryn added what Ray had explained was called a tip. He had asked Ray about tipping during one of Ray's passes by the table, and Ray had explained it in patient detail. And Bryn had found the entire system interesting enough that he had written 2 paragraphs about it before he realized Ray had moved on to another table and he was writing notes to himself out loud. They stood up. Det stood up last. There was a pause where he looked at the empty plate where the bacon had been. Something in the set of his shoulders was different from when he had come in. Not softer exactly, just slightly less like a wall and slightly more like a very large person who had eaten breakfast. They moved toward the door. Harold raised his coffee mug from the round table. He did not say anything. He just raised it, the way you raise a glass to someone, acknowledging the conversation, wishing them well without making a thing of it. Vril paused at the door. She did not raise anything in return, but she held the pause for a second longer than necessary, which Bryn noted and did not write down because some things were not for the report. Ray called out from behind the counter. You come back anytime. Waffle specials running through Saturday. The door swung open. The bell rang. Greta watched from the doorway with her coffee while the 3 of them crossed the parking lot. She watched them go around the side of the building. She watched the faint shimmer in the air above the dry grass field where nothing much grew, and the way that shimmer folded upward and then was gone. She drank her coffee. She went back inside. The big one left a hat, she told Ray. Ray looked. There was nothing on the table where they had been sitting. Det doesn't wear a hat, Ray said. I know, Greta said. I was kidding. Ray thought about it. Oh, he said. On the ship, Vril sat in the command chair and said nothing for a long time. Bryn sat at his station and typed. Det stood near the back of the bridge and stood the way he always stood, except that his arms were slightly less rigid, and he kept running his tongue briefly over his teeth in a way that suggested he was still thinking about the bacon. Vroll pulled up the report format and began speaking her assessment aloud. Bryn typed it simultaneously in his own words, which was how they always did it, so there would be two records. Vroll's assessment went like this. The fear protocol was confirmed non-functional in this environment, not due to biological resistance, shielding technology, or prior warning. The humans simply did not place the incoming threat within the category of things requiring immediate fear. Their threat response appears to be calibrated to near-term and concrete concerns. A 7-foot armored soldier is, to a human in a familiar and comfortable place, a less urgent problem than cold eggs. Suggest the Vreth High Command classify Earth as a non-viable fear protocol target. Suggest also that any future contact be initiated through civilian channels rather than ground forces, as the current approach produced no tactical result and resulted in the consumption of several strips of what this crew now understands is called bacon. Recommend no invasion. Recommend monitoring. Recommend, possibly, opening diplomatic inquiry. End of assessment. Bryn's report was 47 pages. It covered the greeting ritual, the authority structure of the diner, the social function of communal eating, the way the human named Harold had described suffering without self-pity, the construction crew's argument about the drainage pipe on Route 9, which Bryn had partially followed and found surprisingly complex, and a detailed breakdown of why he believed was one of the most functionally powerful individuals he had encountered in any of their 11 campaigns despite holding no official rank, no weapons, and no stated authority over anything beyond a kitchen. The last page of Bryn's report was shorter than the others. He wrote, "These beings have been through enough that difficulty no longer reads as disaster to them. They have a relationship with hardship that is, and I am using this word carefully, domestic. They have made it familiar. They have set a place for it at the table and learned its habits and stopped being surprised by it. This is not toughness in the way the Vreth understand toughness. It is something else, something for which I do not have a word in any language I speak. I would like to go back, not for further assessment. The assessment is complete. I would like to go back because the Belgian waffle special runs through Saturday and I did not try it, and I think I should." End of report. Back at Dot's all-day grill, the breakfast rush wound down the way it always did. The construction crew left first, loud and scraping chairs, dropping cash on the table. The Hendersons left together. At the same time, they always left. Walt folded his newspaper, finished his fourth coffee, nodded to Greta, and went back to his truck. Harold stayed until nearly 9, the way he usually did. On Thursday, when all 4 of them were back at the round table, Harold mentioned the aliens. He described them the way he described everything plainly, with detail, without embellishment. The other 3 listened. There was a silence. Then one of them said, the big one, "Was that armor, or just a heavy coat?" "Armor," Harold said. The man said. They drank their coffee. Walt, who had been listening from the counter, said, "They'll be back." Dot came out of the kitchen and wiped down the counter. "Then they better tip better," she said, and went back to work.